so we're finally tackling this one.
Oh, yeah.
A ton of you have been requesting a deep dive on Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And it's all about, how our brains actually make decisions.
It's not always as rational as we think, right?
Not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, it can get kind of weird.
It really throws a wrench in that whole idea that humans are these logical beings.
So set the stage for us. What's the big idea here?
Well, Kahneman basically says there's this constant tug of war happening in our heads between two systems.
So two systems.
Yeah, he calls them System 1 and System 2.
All right. I'm intrigued.
So System 1, that's all about gut feelings, snap judgments. The stuff that just happens without us really thinking about it.
Like autopilot.
Exactly. It's fast, automatic, and honestly pretty essential for navigating the world.
So like when you swerve to avoid a pothole without even realizing it.
Yeah. System 1, it's lightning fast. But here's the thing. It loves a good shortcut.
Wait, shortcuts? Like those life hack videos?
Kinda.
Okay.
In psychology, we call them heuristics.
Heuristics?
Yeah, mental rules of thumb that help us make quick decisions.
Gotcha.
They're super useful most of the time.
Right.
But they can also lead us to some seriously flawed conclusions.
And that's where System 2 steps in, right?
Exactly. System 2, that's our more thoughtful, analytical side.
Right.
It's the one that can step back, analyze information,
Right.
and come up with a more reasoned response.
So it's kind of like the responsible adult in the room.
Here's the catch.
Uh-oh.
System 2 is also kind of lazy.
Lazy.
Yeah, it takes effort to think things through.
Makes sense.
So System 2 tends to defer to System 1's quick judgments whenever it can.
It's like that friend who always lets you pick the restaurant because they're busy looking at memes on their phone.
Perfect analogy.
And that's how we end up making some pretty irrational decisions, even when we think we're being totally logical. Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going.
Yeah.
So how do these System 1 shortcuts actually mess with our thinking?
Well, they lead to what Kahneman calls cognitive biases.
Cognitive biases.
These systematic errors in our thinking
Right.
that crop up because of System 1's tendency to oversimplify.
So like optical illusions, but for our thoughts.
Exactly. Our brains are trying to be efficient,
Right.
but sometimes that efficiency comes at the cost of accuracy.
And that's where things get really interesting because these biases affect pretty much every aspect of our lives.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, hit me with an example. What kind of bias are we talking about here?
Okay, so think about the last time you were at a restaurant and had to choose between two dishes.
All right.
Let's say one was described as rich and decadent, and the other as light and healthy.
Ooh, tough choice.
Right.
I'm already feeling indecisive.
Now, even if the ingredients are pretty similar,
Okay.
that framing those descriptive words can totally sway your decision.
Oh, yeah.
You might end up choosing the decadent dish. I think even if you were originally leaning towards a lighter meal.
It's like they planted the idea of treating myself in my brain.
Exactly.
And I wouldn't have even thought twice about it.
And that's what Kahneman calls the framing effect.
The framing effect.
The way information is presented can totally change how we perceive it, even if the underlying facts are the same.
So even when we think we're making a rational choice,
Right.
our brains are already being nudged in a certain direction by these subtle cues.
That's the power of System 1. It's constantly working in the background, shaping our perceptions.
Wow.
Influencing our decisions without us even realizing it.
Okay, I'm officially creeped out by my own brain now. Is there any way to outsmart these sneaky biases?
That's what we're going to unpack next. Remember that lazy System 2?
Oh, yeah?
Well, it turns out we can actually train it to be a little more proactive.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ready for part 2.
Let's do it. So, we were talking about those sneaky biases.
Yeah, how our brains can kind of trick us.
Right. And there's another one that's super relevant today.
Lay it on me.
It's called the halo effect.
The halo effect. I feel like I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's this tendency where our overall impression of someone can kind of color our judgments about their specific traits.
Okay, so, like, if you think someone is attractive,
Right.
you might also assume they're intelligent or kind,
Exactly.
even if you have no evidence to support that.
Right. It's like our brains are taking a mental shortcut,
Yeah.
assuming that if someone excels in one area,
Okay.
they must be good at everything else too.
Oh, yeah. Like when you see a celebrity endorsing a product and you suddenly want it,
Exactly.
even though they probably don't know anything about it.
Right. Or think about those online reviews.
Yeah.
where someone gives a product 5 stars just because they love the brand. Even if the product itself is mediocre, it's the halo effect in action.
So it can actually have real-world consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
It can lead to, unfair advantages for people who are perceived as attractive or successful. Those who don't fit that mold might be unfairly judged.
It's a really important point to consider.
It makes me think about, how we form opinions about people based on first impressions.
Yeah.
Like if someone shows up late to a meeting, we might automatically assume they're irresponsible.
Right.
Even if there's a legitimate reason for their delay.
Exactly. It's why it's so important to be aware of this halo effect.
Right.
And try to judge people based on, their actions and merits.
Right.
Not just our initial gut feelings.
Okay, so we've got the framing effect, the halo effect. Are there any other biases lurking in the shadows of our minds that we should be on the lookout for?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most powerful and pervasive biases is loss aversion.
Loss aversion.
It's this deep-seated fear of losing something.
Okay.
Which often outweighs the potential pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
So like when I stress out more about losing $20 than I celebrate finding $20.
A perfect example. Think about it. Losing $20 feels terrible, right? Triggers a sense of lost regret.
It does.
But finding $20, while nice, doesn't evoke that same intensity of emotion.
It's true. I'll agonize over a small loss in the stock market.
Yeah.
But barely even register a similar gain.
Classic loss aversion.
Wow.
And this bias has huge implications for how we make decisions.
Right.
Especially when it comes to things like investing, negotiating.
Okay.
Or even just trying something new.
I can see that. I might be hesitant to switch jobs, even if a new opportunity offers better pay and benefits.
Right.
Just because I'm afraid of losing the familiarity and security of my current role.
Exactly. We cling to what we know, even if it's not serving us well.
Yeah.
Because the fear of loss looms larger in our minds than the potential for gain.
So it's like we're wired to play it safe, even when taking a risk might lead to better outcomes in the long run.
Precisely. And this is where Kahneman's work gets really practical.
Okay.
Understanding these biases like loss aversion allows us to start recognizing them in ourselves and making more, conscious, deliberate choices.
Okay, so we've explored these different biases, framing, halo effect, loss aversion.
Right.
But what about the source material we discussed before?
Yeah.
It mentioned something about how group decision-making could help mitigate individual biases.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Can we dig into that a little bit?
Sure. One of the potential strengths of groups is that they can bring a wider range of perspectives to the table.
Okay.
Which can help counteract those individual biases we've been talking about.
So, like, if everyone in a group is susceptible to the halo effect,
right,
but they're all haloing different things,
right,
those biases might balance each other out.
Exactly. If you have a diverse group of people, different backgrounds, they're less likely to all fall prey to the same biases.
It's like having a built-in system of checks and balances.
Precisely. The key is to create an environment where everyone feels comfortable sharing their opinions,
right,
even if they go against the grain. This helps to counter the tendency for groups to fall into groupthink.
Groupthink.
Where everyone just agrees with the most dominant voice in the room.
Oh, yeah. You don't want that.
No, you don't. So it's not just about having a group.
Okay.
It's about fostering an environment of open communication and healthy debate.
That makes a lot of sense. But aren't there times when groups make even worse decisions than individuals?
Oh, absolutely.
Like those stories about mobs making irrational choices.
Right. Groups can certainly amplify biases as well.
Okay.
Especially if there's a strong pressure to conform.
Right.
Or if the group is homogenous in its thinking.
Yeah, everyone's thinking the same way.
It's like that saying, 2 heads are better than 1 unless they're both banging against the same wall.
Ooh, I like that.
So it's about understanding how group dynamics can both enhance and hinder decision-making.
This is all so fascinating. So we've talked a lot about how our thinking can go wrong.
Right.
But what about the flip side?
Yeah.
Can understanding these biases actually help us make better decisions?
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the most empowering takeaways from thinking fast and slow.
Okay.
Kahneman argues that by understanding our own biases and the way our minds work, we can start to make more deliberate and informed choices.
So it's like we're upgrading our mental software.
Exactly. For example, once you're aware of the anchoring effect, you can be more cautious about the first piece of information you receive in a negotiation.
Gotcha.
You can consciously try to adjust your thinking to avoid being unduly influenced by that initial anchor.
And with loss aversion, you can try to reframe your thinking.
Right.
To focus on the potential gains rather than just the potential losses.
Exactly. It's about shifting your perspective
Right.
and challenging those automatic knee-jerk reactions that can sometimes lead us astray. It's like having a cheat sheet for your own mind.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's like knowing the rules of the game so you can play it smarter.
Right.
But if our brains are so prone to these shortcuts and biases, is it even possible to be truly rational?
That's a great question, and it leads us to one of the most thought-provoking aspects of Kahneman's work.
Okay.
He challenges the very notion of rationality.
What?
Suggesting that we're not perfectly rational beings,
Okay.
but rather predictably irrational.
Predictably irrational. That sounds almost paradoxical.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But what Kahneman means is that our irrationality isn't random or chaotic.
Right.
It follows certain patterns that can be studied and understood.
So it's like there's a method to our madness.
In a way, yes. And by understanding those patterns, we can start to anticipate our own irrational tendencies and make adjustments accordingly.
So we're not perfectly rational robots.
No.
But we're not hopelessly flawed either.
Right.
We've got these predictable quirks that we can learn to work with.
Exactly. It's about self-awareness. And using that knowledge to our advantage.
This is all so eye-opening.
Yeah.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface of thinking fast and slow.
There's so much to unpack here.
I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's one more crucial concept we need to explore.
Ooh.
The idea of the two selves.
The two selves. That sounds intriguing.
It is.
What are these two selves all about?
Well, Kahneman proposes that we have an experiencing self and a remembering self. And it turns out they don't always see eye to eye.
All right, so last time we left off with this whole idea of our two self.
Yeah, the experiencing self and the remembering self.
Fill me in. What's the difference?
So think of it this way. The experiencing self, that's you in the moment, right?
Okay.
Living life, taking in all the sensations and emotions of whatever's happening.
So that's me right now sipping on my coffee and trying to wrap my head around these two selves.
Exactly. You're experiencing this conversation right now, but then there's also the remembering self.
Okay.
And that's the part of you that looks back on experiences and kind of creates the stories and the memories and the judgments about what happened.
So it's like the inner Instagrammer curating the highlight reel of my life.
Perfect analogy.
Maybe adding a few filters to make things look better.
Exactly. And here's where things get really interesting. Kahneman says these two selves, they often disagree about what actually happened.
Wait, what? How can my own selves not be on the same page?
Well, it all comes down to how our memories work.
Okay.
Our remembering self tends to prioritize peak moments and endings rather than the whole experience.
Oh, yeah?
It's like that time you went to a concert.
I love concerts.
Right. You might remember the amazing encore, but totally forget about the 2 hours of standing in a crowded, sweaty venue beforehand.
Oh, my gosh, that's so true.
Right.
I block out all the bad parts and just remember belting out the lyrics to my favorite songs.
Exactly. It's called the peak end rule.
The peak end rule.
And it explains why we might remember a vacation fondly, even if most of it was just okay.
Right.
As long as we had a few incredible moments and a great last day.
So our memories are basically unreliable narrators.
Kinda.
They're telling us a story that might not reflect the full reality of what we experienced.
Exactly. It's like our brains are editing the movie of our lives.
Wow.
Cutting out the boring parts and focusing on the dramatic climax.
Okay, this is blowing my mind. But why does it matter that these two selves are telling different stories?
Well, it has huge implications for how we understand happiness.
Okay.
Kahneman suggests that we often make decisions based on what will make our remembering self happy, rather than what will bring the most joy to our experiencing self.
Hold on. So I might choose something that makes for a better story later, even if it's not actually that enjoyable in the moment.
That's the paradox. Think about it. You might choose a challenging hike over a relaxing day at the beach.
Yeah, I could see that.
Because you think conquering that mountain will give you a better story to tell later.
So it's like I'm prioritizing my Instagram feed over my actual well-being.
In a way, yes. It's like we're constantly trying to impress this future version of ourselves, even if it means sacrificing present moment happiness.
Wow, this really makes you think about how you're making decisions. So how do we reconcile these two selves?
Right.
How do we make sure we're actually living a good life, not just creating good memories?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's something we all have to grapple with.
Right.
Kahneman encourages us to be more aware of these two selves and to try to make choices that honor both.
So it's about finding a balance between those peak moments that make for a great story and those everyday joys that might not be as Instagrammable.
Right.
But actually make up the bulk of our lives.
Exactly. And that requires some serious self-reflection.
Yeah.
What truly matters to you? What kind of life do you want to experience, not just remember?
This is so thought-provoking.
Isn't it?
It's like we've been given this whole new lens for looking at our lives and the choices we make.
That's the beauty of Kahneman's work. It doesn't give us easy answers,
right,
but it gives us a framework for understanding the complex workings of our own minds.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I know my brain is definitely doing some heavy lifting right now.
Mine too.
So to wrap things up, if our listeners could walk away with just one key takeaway from thinking fast and slow, what would you want it to be?
That we are all wonderfully, beautifully irrational creatures.
I love that.
Our brains are constantly trying to simplify the world, and sometimes that leads to biases and shortcuts.
Yeah.
But by understanding these tendencies, we can become more conscious decision makers and create a life that's truly fulfilling both in the moment and in our memories.
That's a great takeaway.
Yeah.
And remember, the journey of self-discovery doesn't end here.
Nope.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of your own mind.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for more mind-bended insights, we highly recommend checking out the Micky channel.
Yes.
They got some great stuff on psychology, decision-making, all sorts of other thought-provoking topics.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into thinking fast and slow.
It's been fun.
We'll see you next time for another adventure in the world of ideas.